Hello everyone and welcome. Sit back, relax, make a cup of tea or whatever you like to drink and get ready for new stories from YellowCat. Send your own favorite stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. So subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet, and let's get started. What is your story when you fired someone or when someone was fired because of you? Part 2. I had worked in retail for 5 years before upper management told all managers they needed to switch departments to learn more about each one. My boss had to switch, but I didn't have to because I was a low-end manager. When I finally saw one of my favorite store managers, I exclaimed, "How cool!" Yes, so I took up a lot of her slack because we work as a team, and that's how it should be when you have someone in training. She struggled a lot to adjust to our department. I was therefore much faster and more efficient than she was because I had worked in the department for 4 years, and rather than being appreciative of the assistance, she became resentful. All of a sudden, nothing I did was right. I was constantly getting into problems and getting in trouble for the tiniest mistake. I discovered one day that many of my own department supplies had been destroyed before I had the permission to do so. Before I could complete the write-offs, I had to hold on to them for 6 months. When I inquired about what had happened, I was informed that my boss had thrown everything into the compactor without following the right procedures, which meant that my inventory would be significantly off. I was crazy. When I confronted her about it, she completely denied it. I was taking some leadership classes at the time, and one of the classes I was taking included the boss of my boss. As we got to know one another, he soon discovered that my boss had been lying about me. Since his boss was on my manager's side rather than his, we worked out an arrangement to catch her in the act. So, one day, I discover some supplies that shouldn't have been in my supply closet. Confused yet? I had a conversation with my boss's boss's boss. She rejected my request, but despite that, here they were bearing her signature. She replied no when I approached her and asked if she had changed her mind. After they turned on the camera, it turned out that my boss, who was determined to have me fired, had taken the supplies off the floor and placed them in my supply closet. Subsequently that day, my boss informed her boss's boss, the one who had rejected my supplies, that I had signed her name on them. Later that day, as I was carrying out my boss's instructions once more, I heard her being paged to the office. Because of it, she lost her job. Everyone blamed me for her losing her job because she was the favorite manager. I was told I was a horrible person and lied. Over the next 5 years, she would stalk me on Facebook at random just to get even with me. She once tried to accuse me of robbing her money when she saw that I worked at my new job. Thank goodness I hurried into the office as soon as she left to let them know who she was and what she was doing. It was about 5 years since I last saw her. While I hope she changed her ways, it seems unlikely. I had a manager at a restaurant, and one of my servers was an extremely frightening sociopath. He had a bad reputation for intimidating other servers, trying to take advantage of any new hire, and getting wasted at work. Despite numerous warnings, the owners needed a good reason to fire him because he had threatened to sue them for discrimination if he was ever fired. He was so skilled at lying and so self-assured in his ability to tell lies that he would tell the target of his deception outright and never back down. I had been seriously suspecting him for months that he was stealing from the restaurant, but one day I finally discovered that he had made a mistake. Apparently, he had managed to obtain my co-manager's login information and used it to take items off a check after the customer had left and paid in cash. This would imply that he kept whatever remaining cash in his pocket. Not only did my co-manager not work that shift, but at the time of this transaction, he was the only server in the restaurant. I feel I should explain how tabs work because most people tip servers with credit card write-ins these days. At the end of the day, the computer deducts all the tangible cash used to pay tabs from the total amount of credit card tips, and the restaurant has its own petty cash ready to give out the remaining amount to the servers. Thanks to the awesome computer, we had a record of the entire event, apart from what exactly he did with the money. Thus, servers are in charge of keeping all the money they receive for tabs throughout the day. If you want to rob a restaurant, target the servers. They have all the cash. We therefore came up with a plan to confront the owner about this at the end of the evening after he had squared away all the evidence related to this server and his red-handed theft during the day. We intended to avoid making accusations and instead asked him a series of questions that would get harder and harder for him to respond to. We expected him to attempt to lie. It was so tense that it felt like a scene from a movie. For effect, we asked him to speak in our wine cellar, which is located in the basement and has a dungeon-like appearance. Basically, what happened was as followed. I'll refer to the sociopath server as T. The owner. So T, we had some trouble understanding one of your checks from this morning. Can you explain it to us? Displays T the check with the item missing. T starts babbling a ridiculously convoluted explanation for why it's missing something that none of us can understand. Owner repeats the same query. T is getting agitated now and is getting very red. This is the first time any of us have seen him become upset about lying. Once more, he tells an extremely convoluted tale. Owner. Okay, T, when we checked on the computer to see what happened, we found that someone had voided this item off the check. We paused and exchanged glances. The co-manager voided it, and as you and I both know, she's not in the office today. So, could you please clarify how this occurred? T said, I don't know. Must have been a mistake with the computer. I don't know how the computer works, with a stone face. The owner. T, Seville here today has her own manager code, right? She would not need to use co-manager's code. So how could the co-manager, who is not here today, have been used to void this item? T says, well, I don't know how the computer works when it makes errors. That's not my fault. Owner, what's not your fault? T, the void? At this point he's blushing, sweating, and his voice is shaking. The owner is refusing to back down and requests an explanation a third time. T said, okay, all right. I voided the item and pocketed the money. The owner says, yes, you took the money. Yes, I took it, now remorseful, and I knew you were going to ask me about it when you brought me down. And when you asked me, oh God, I just lied about it a bunch. When you asked me, I hope we can please talk to you in private to explain and hope to go on probation and stay and show you that it'll never happen again. Blah, blah, blah. He continues by asking for and pleading for his position. The proprietor asked him to return to the restaurant so we could get our act together. We fist-pumped and high-fived each other as soon as he left the room, celebrating like we had just launched a successful rocket to the moon. It's very rare for a bad employee to ever accept responsibility for their reprehensible behavior, so it was pure justice when a real psycho admitted to stealing in front of witnesses, especially if you're a manager. We threw him out and celebrated with champagne after he pleaded and cried to keep his job. Do you have any wild and wacky HOA stories to share? Part 2. At my last house, we had an HOA. It was a townhouse community of about 50 units. People were required to keep their trash cans inside their garages away from public view, according to a notice that was distributed. Since the majority of those keeping them out disobeyed, they simply began removing people's left-out garbage cans. That didn't really help, as you can imagine, and people just started leaving trash lying around. Subsequently, the HOA board removed the trash cans and placed them back at the community's entrance for future claim. Well, for weeks, there was just a wall of trash cans at the entrance, which was far more unsightly than a few cans scattered here and there. Given that they didn't resolve anything and instead made matters worse, I thought the entire situation was rather humorous. Way to go, guys! Enthusiast about amateur radio, my dad desired a towering mast. Per the HOA, permanent masts were prohibited. He therefore purchased a 9-foot-tall U.S. Marine surplus pneumatic one. According to reports, it was portable. My dad decided to install it somewhere no one would see it, behind the shed. He then applied a dull gray paint to it, hardly noticeable at night and only truly apparent when the sky's clear blue. When it was in use, it was always up, but up was 60 feet tall. The HOA was obviously against it. It's a massive eyesore that lowers property values. The HOA was unaware that he had been using it for several months because it was down 98% of the time and invisible from outside the property. The fact that my dad and I could take it down, move it, and put it up somewhere else in less than 10 minutes, demonstrating that it is obviously not a permanent structure, was also lost on the HOA. Although the HOA was complaining and doing HOA things, it was still permitted. My dad refused to ARRL's offer to assist in the fight against it. How did he act? Painted it white, placed a US flag on top of it, and every time the mast was raised, it blared the Star-Spangled Banner with speakers mounted at the top. Eventually, the HOA sent him a note requesting that he take down the speakers from his flagpole, which he carried out. After receiving another note requesting that he take down the mast, he replied with a copy of the previous note stating that the HOA had verified it was okay to have a flagpole, so that answered that question as well. If the HOA desired, he would even have left it up all the time. In the 5 years prior to his move, he never received a response from the HOA. Two friends I had/have. One resident of a homeowners association HOA had a policy prohibiting private businesses on the land, but one guy built a steel building on the corner of his property and began fixing trucks. One day, he returned home to find his lawn destroyed and muddy tracks leading to the repair shop. It's obvious that a truck was backed over. He doesn't get the impression that the owner will show up to apologize and fix the lawn. In an attempt to prevent it from happening again, my friend fixes his lawn, but the same thing happens. He climbs up into the mountains with a friend to retrieve the largest boulder that fits on a trailer. They retrieve it and partially bury it within his yard. When he returns home a few days later, oil is dripping up the building and covering the entire rock. The owner insists that he pay for the trailer and remove the rock. After a few expletives, he instructed him to go to court and attempt to persuade the judge and jury that he was entitled to have his trucks driven over his land. And that was the end of it. Second friend, people kept running down his mailbox or hitting it with bats. He has the ability to weld. Using an oxygen bottle, he constructed a mailbox, attached it to a metal pole base using incredibly powerful bolts. When the county arrived, they had to break off bolts or a wood pole that was smaller than a specific size and informed him that he was not allowed to have the bolts of that size. After obtaining the smaller bolts, he proceeded to weld what appeared to be elegant spears onto the post, protruding approximately radiator height. He has only once gone outside and discovered grill parts and antifreeze on the ground. Since our condo hadn't been updated since 1987, I had to do a lot of renovations when we purchased it in 2018 prior to the real estate boom. I followed the guidelines and sent the property manager and the boss all my notifications. They threatened to fine me if I started throwing stuff in our shared dumpster. I inquire as to what they mean when they say no building materials in the dumpster. When I inquire about this over the phone with our disposal company, they tell me up front that they don't care as long as we pay a flat fee to have this emptied twice a week based on weight or pickup. I keep dumping because there are no signs on the dumpster or in our rules and regulations. The president of the body then tells me that I had better pay attention to him or else. I gently inform him that I've complied with all regulations, paid my fees on schedule, and that this includes disposing of my trash. I have the trash company willing to put that in writing and they don't charge us extra. He becomes agitated and says, "You're going to regret this," as I leave. I politely say, "We'll see about that." Since I don't handle threats well, I carried out my plan. Run for the board and get a seat at the table with my best friend. Well, elections come, and lo and behold, I top the ticket, because it's all politics and I'm good at making friends, whereas the president wasn't very well received. After the bot is chosen, members vote on their roles. Using my highest vote total, I suggest that the president, who currently holds the fewest votes among all the bod members, may not be the best candidate for the role going forward. I persuaded the other 5 members that I was correct, and they elected a new member to the presidency. The now former president was a bunch of S. I mean, here's a guy who's over 60, stomping his feet and grumbling that we can't get rid of him. I simply chuckle and ask, "So Dr. Gardner, how's it looking now?" Now we've moved him down a few pegs to a peon director versus a role, and he was upset. Now I remind him in every quarterly meeting by bringing up past decisions where he chose wrong and use that as examples of how we shouldn't operate in the future. Let's go back 5 years to now. They adore me because I listen to my residents. I keep topping the ticket, and the old funds have to put up with me a lot. They did post a notice on the dumpster after the fact, but I reminded them that I would make sure to notify them if we find someone for false pretenses. That and the knowledge that the rest of the bod has accepted me and shunned the former president make me someone not to mess with. If you want to watch the part 1, click the link here. Thank you for subscribing, the likes, and comments. We're very happy to see you all in the comments too. Thanks for your support.